Okay, so Gardaí will be given powers to use facial recognition technology to identify suspects in serious crimes for the first time. Justice Minister Helen McEntee is seeking Cabinet approval to allow the use of special software to catch killers and child predators, as well as ruling out innocent people in investigations. Ms McEntee is also expected to tell Gardaí today that national security and public safety must override the right to privacy in certain instances. Well, Liam Herrick is Executive Director of the Irish Council for Civil Liberties. He joins us now. Liam, thank you for joining us. And I suppose your initial reaction to these proposals from the Justice Minister.
Good morning, Greg. Well, I think we're concerned at what we're hearing from the Minister today. Facial recognition technology is widely recognized as one of the most invasive and powerful types of modern surveillance. It gives the users or the system the ability to track people's movements and match your face, which is a unique identifier, with the database of other persons. And the potential misuse of this data to track individuals moving through public spaces, to restrict their movement, to monitor who they're protesting or meeting with, is so powerful that it's led authorities such as the European Data Protection Board to recommend a ban on its use in public space. So that's the background here. And I think the Minister may want to do this, but I think she's going to face a lot of legal obstacles to being able to do this with regard to Irish and European law.
Now, whilst they might say it's quite emotive, and you can understand, because, hey, who wants murderers and child predators roaming the place? You know, will do anything to stop that. So I can understand why they've used those as examples. But surely, if this is to be effective to identify those people, then we're all really effectively being identified all of the time.
That's the key point. I mean, the Minister talks about trying to restrict an absolute right to privacy. Nobody believes there's an absolute right to privacy, but there is a constitutional right to privacy, and restrictions have to be proportionate. And if the Minister believes that she can bring forward a scheme which only surveils people involved in serious crime, we'd love to see it, because we're not familiar with any such system that's been introduced anywhere else before. I think the European Data Protection Board likens such a system to effectively treating individual human faces as number plates, as human license plates, because the technology is similar to the technology that's used for automatic number plate recognition, that there's a database of faces, number plates, and cameras then are trained to match what they view or surveil with that database. It is something that intrinsically goes to the whole question of individual autonomy and our ability to really walk about our daily lives in an anonymous way that aren't subject to surveillance.
Now, just in relation to that, you know, are we talking CCTVs? We don't know yet. Yeah. Are we talking CCTV cameras in Letterkenny Main Street, the streets of Dublin? Or could they say, right, and we had this conversation when they were talking about CCTV, for example, to catch people who are littering. Would they say, well, listen, we need as much of this country covered, so we're going to have to be able to access whatever cameras are on the network, be it a CCTV camera at a beach in West Donegal to stop people fly tipping versus a camera, you know, at the top of O'Connell Street. So in other words, they will presumably try and get just as much coverage and access to as many cameras as is possible, or would it be limited to cameras that are designed, you know, for people's security, if that makes sense?
I mean, I suppose we really don't know. But I think as listeners will be familiar, there has been a huge expansion in the use of CCTV by the guards, by local authorities, and by private bodies. So there's a lot of capacity out there. What specifically would be proposed here, we don't really know. The guards, certainly in urban centres, already themselves make use of a very widespread distribution of CCTV. It's important to recognise, too, that what the guards are doing at the moment is already problematic. So the Data Protection Commission has launched a number of investigations into the guards' use of CCTV as things stand. Their record in terms of data protection is poor. So in that context, to give them use of a much more powerful tool, which will allow them to track individuals between areas, I think is incredibly risky. And the trend in Europe is against this. I mean, the European Data Protection Board and Data Protection Supervisor have called for a ban on the use of facial recognition tech in public spaces and by law enforcement.
But I mean, the problem is
the
if the concern is its misuse, though, really, isn't it? Because I presume if you or I were wrongly implicated in a crime, you know, we would be very happy to be vindicated and freed off the back of facial recognition technology showing me to be, you know, 50 miles away at the time of a crime. So, in other words, what it might do to benefit people is there not a tipping point there, the advantage versus the disadvantage?
So the legislation that's already being brought forward by the Minister, the Garda Digital Recording Bill, tries to provide a new legal basis for the use of CCTV, which would allow, in instances where a serious crime has been committed, or indeed if somebody is accused of a crime, that they might be able to go back through CCTV in particular areas with the idea of either incriminating or exculpating somebody. But we're talking here about using artificial intelligence through the technology to monitor in a live form mass crowds. So again, the theoretical suggestion that it could be used in such a way that was focused and targeted only for serious crime or when a child goes missing or something is very appealing. But we're not familiar with any case where this has been put into practice, where that's been achieved. I mean, if you look at the United States in particular, where there's been a lot of use of this technology, we've had very serious problems, not just with the surveillance end of it, but also with the biases that are built up in the database, that they tend to be very poor at distinguishing people from certain ethnic minorities or indeed women. So the discriminatory aspect that has come in too. There's legal actions against this type of technology all over the US, in Canada, France, Italy, Germany, Belgium, Sweden, and Australia. It's a legal quagmire here. And we're surprised that the minister is bringing this forward, but we'll certainly strongly oppose it.
Yeah, and also you can imagine it too, as you say, you know, with mass surveillance, say, for instance, of demonstrations, you know, could that be used as a subtle or unsubtle tool to discourage, you know, people taken to the streets, rightly so, you know, in the knowledge that maybe they could be identified or that could be used to get, you know, it creates I think it almost, it would, I find some people might find it limited, their liberty might feel limited.
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly the danger that we're talking about when we talk about a chilling effect on people's right to freedom of assembly, freedom of movement, freedom of association. You know, the Data Protection Board has said that applications like facial recognition technology interfere with fundamental rights and freedoms to such an extent that they call into question the essence of those rights and freedoms. You are no longer an autonomous, anonymous individual in a public square.
You know, but many of us will opt out and many of us won't. The likes of, and it's an obvious point to make though, but the likes of Facebook, you know, people will have got a notification that their face appeared in a wedding in Galway. You know, they just happened to be in the background of a picture that was taken, and, you know, Facebook goes to automatically tag in it. So the likes of Facebook and other social media platforms are actively scanning our images, saying, is this you? Do you want to tag yourself into this picture? Is it because there's consent there, or there's the option to opt out that's different? Or maybe people aren't aware that that's routinely happening with these tech companies. I don't know.
Well, the tech companies are an area where this has already been flagged as a serious legal problem, and we've seen Facebook deleting the databases that they built up through, you know, and Apple have had a lot of concerns in this area too. I mean, the databases are a particular problem because the company that is most responsible for creating the databases that allow a system like this to work, that allow the camera to match your image against a database, Clearview technology is under threat of legal action in most countries in the world at the moment because they've illegally built up the database.
Are you concerned at the Justice Minister coming out with, you know, instantly incredibly emotive examples? Do you think really a government should have a responsibility to have a discussion, but come at it from a neutral perspective, you know, to say, well, these are the pros, these are the cons, let's see what people think? Because I know I'm reading this and I'm going, well, if it stops murderers and if it stops any exploitation of children, you know, how could I be against that sort of thing? Should a government really not sort of say, well, here's a couple of arguments, have a conversation, let's see what we as a nation, where we want to go, rather than sort of going really emotive right from the get-go? I don't know. Maybe I'm looking for balance, but maybe governments don't offer that.
Well, I think you make a very good point. I mean, so much of the discussion around surveillance, whether it's about facial recognition technology or around biometric data, around encryption of messages, that law enforcement bodies talk about front and center things like child safety and child abduction, which are hugely emotive and very important issues to justify measures that will apply to a much wider category of people. But however the minister might want to frame this discussion, it would be framed for the government in a different way, because inevitably, and in fairness, the minister acknowledges this, they're going to have to talk to the Data Protection Commission about this. It's very likely European bodies will also take an interest in it. The Oireachtas will have to have an opportunity to consider this. They'll need legislation. It's very clear they'll need fresh legislation on this. So this is by no means over. I think that there's a long road to go, and we would think that the legal obstacles to this are going to be significant.
Liam Herrick, thanks so much for your time.